The sun rose slowly over the village, spilling golden light across the dusty streets and the clay huts with their thatched roofs. Smoke drifted from cooking fires, carrying the aroma of roasted yams and sweet maize. From every corner of the village, the sound of drums called the people to celebrate, vibrating through the ground like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Children ran laughing between the stalls, their feet kicking up clouds of red dust. Mothers hung brightly colored fabrics from the low-hanging branches, decorating their homes with care, while the market women arranged baskets of fresh fruit, palm nuts, and vibrant spices. The air was filled with chatter, with song, and with the anticipation of the feast that would mark the heart of the Christmas celebration. The village felt alive, each sound and motion a thread in the vibrant tapestry of community life. At the center of it all stood the great baobab tree, ancient and steadfast, its gnarled roots curling like the fingers of a sleeping giant. Its branches reached toward the sky, each leaf trembling in the morning breeze as though whispering secrets to those who would listen. Elders gathered nearby, leaning on their carved walking sticks, their eyes following the leaves as they swayed. "The wind speaks today," muttered Nanaya, her voice low and measured. "Listen carefully, for it may bring news, or warning." Villagers glanced at the baobab as they moved through the square, some brushing their fingers against the trunk for luck, others bowing slightly, acknowledging the spirits of the ancestors that were said to dwell within. A subtle tension hung beneath the morning cheer, a sense that the day would not unfold as simply as it appeared. Near the edge of the village, in a small courtyard filled with sunlight, Amina moved with quiet grace. She had risen before the sun, her hands already busy with bowls of rice, fresh herbs, and fragrant spices. Each grain she measured, each pinch of seasoning she added, was done with precision, respect, and love. Villagers passing by paused, watching her work. "Amina," called an elderly neighbor, "the rice will taste like the blessings of the ancestors themselves." Amina smiled gently, but her hands did not falter. The rice was more than food, it was the promise of unity, of shared prosperity, and of traditions honored. Mothers brought their children near to watch her stir the steaming pots, to learn, to remember. Amina felt the weight of their eyes, the pressure of expectation pressing upon her shoulders like the warm sun overhead, and she breathed deeply, grounding herself in the rhythm of her work and the ancestral presence in the village. From the shadowed side of the courtyard, Kofi watched. His arms were crossed, his dark eyes narrowed, lips pressed in quiet resentment. He had helped little in preparing the feast, yet every glance at Amina stirred a bitter longing in his chest. She moved with an ease he could not match, her laughter soft but confident, her respect in the village unquestioned. He imagined the villagers praising him instead, imagining recognition, influence, and honor that had been denied to him. He shifted from foot to foot, letting his eyes linger on her hands, the way she stirred the rice with care, the gentle tilt of her head as she consulted her grandmother's advice. A plan began to form in the shadows of his envy, small and secret, like a seed planted in fertile soil. It would require patience, cunning, and the cover of trust. Yet even as the thought came, a flicker of doubt passed through him, a whisper of ancestral warning he could not entirely silence. The village continued its preparations, unaware of the storm brewing in a single young man's heart. Children raced past Kofi, their laughter bright as the morning sun, oblivious to his silent scheming. The drums beat steadily, calling the villagers together, binding them in rhythm, in song, and in the shared heartbeat of the community. Smoke from the cooking fires curled in lazy spirals, smelling of warmth, of tradition, of home. The colors of the fabrics fluttered in the breeze, reds and yellows, blues and greens, catching the sunlight like shards of brilliance. And through it all, the baobab tree remained a silent observer, its leaves whispering, its trunk steady and immovable, a reminder of the ancestors watching, listening, waiting. Amina paused, wiping her brow, and looked up at the tree. Its presence comforted her, reminded her that she was part of something larger than herself. She inhaled the aroma of the rice, the scent of the earth, the mingling of spices and sunlight, and felt a quiet strength settle over her. She knew the feast would be remembered, and that her hands carried the honor of her family, the trust of her neighbors, and the blessing of generations past. Kofi's eyes darkened as he continued to watch. A flash of anger passed through him as a group of villagers stopped to nod at Amina, praising her diligence. He clenched his fists, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Why must it always be her?" he muttered to himself. Shadows of jealousy stretched long across the courtyard, mingling with the morning light. Small, lingering glances, whispered thoughts, and the unspoken plans of one young man threatened to darken the bright day. Even as he plotted, he could not shake the feeling that the baobab watched him too, that the wind carried warnings he had yet to hear. The drums grew louder, the laughter of children more vibrant, and the smells of cooking richer. Life in the village pulsed forward, bright and beautiful, as Amina continued her work with patience, care, and pride. The stage was set. Joy, tradition, and celebration flourished in the sun-drenched streets, yet beneath it all, the quiet tension of envy whispered, preparing the village for the lessons that lay ahead. In the heart of the community, among the clay huts, the dancing fabrics, and the drums that never ceased, the seeds of conflict, courage, and wisdom had been sown, ready to unfold under the watchful eyes of ancestors and the steady branches of the ancient baobab tree. Nana Ya sat quietly under the shade of the baobab tree, her back straight and her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes, though lined with age, were sharp and bright, reflecting a lifetime of knowledge and the wisdom of the ancestors. The children ran past, their laughter ringing through the dusty streets, yet she did not flinch. She observed everything: the bustling women arranging baskets of yams, the market vendors displaying colorful fabrics, the way Amina moved with quiet determination as she stirred the steaming pots of rice. There was a rhythm to it all, a pulse that carried the memory of generations. "Child," Nanaya said, her voice low but firm as she addressed Amina, who paused mid-stir to listen, "do not let your heart be blinded by joy alone. There are eyes in the shadows, and hearts may carry envy as sharp as a knife. Guard your rice, yes, but guard your spirit more. Respect the ways of our ancestors, for they watch, always, and they remember." Amina bowed her head slightly, feeling the weight of the words. "Yes, grandmother," she replied softly. "I will be careful." Her fingers returned to the rice, moving with deliberate care, yet the warning left a chill at the edge of her warmth. Somewhere behind her, Kofi lingered, his gaze dark and restless, and though he pretended to busy himself with other tasks, Nana Ya's eyes followed him. She had seen this before, the slow burn of jealousy in a young heart, the plotting that starts small and grows dangerous. The village chief emerged from his hut, his sandals clapping softly against the ground. He moved with authority, his presence commanding immediate respect. The villagers paused in their activities as he approached, his eyes sweeping the square, lingering on Amina, and then on the other families preparing for the feast. "Remember your place, and honor the traditions that bind us," he said, his voice steady and full of weight. "This feast is not for one alone, but for all. Every hand that contributes carries the honor of the village. Let no envy or haste ruin what our ancestors have entrusted to us." Amina's heart beat faster, a mix of pride and anxiety swelling inside her. She wanted to honor the chief's words, to carry the responsibility with dignity, but the awareness of Kofi's watchful eyes made her pulse tighten. She knew that her skill with the rice would be noticed, celebrated even, but what if admiration turned to resentment? The thought made her stomach twist, and she forced herself to focus on the ingredients, the rhythm of stirring, the fragrant steam rising in delicate curls. Whispers began to thread through the village like wind between leaves. A vendor leaned toward another and muttered, "Did you hear? Someone thinks the rice may be tampered with this year." The word spread, quiet at first, then louder, carrying the weight of fear. Mothers glanced over their shoulders, children stopped their games, and a few villagers shook their heads, trying to decide whether the whispers were truth or idle chatter. Amina's hands paused mid-stir as she caught fragments of the conversations. Her brow furrowed, a tension she could not shake settling over her shoulders like a heavy shawl. Kofi's lips twitched in the corner of the courtyard as he overheard the murmurs, a small smirk forming. The seed of his plan, once tentative, began to take root with a subtle, dangerous strength. Yet even as he considered the first steps of mischief, a shiver ran through him, and he glanced toward the baobab. The great tree stood tall, its gnarled roots grounding the village, its branches stretching skyward as if holding secrets in the sway of its leaves. Somehow, its silent presence reminded him that actions, even in shadow, rarely go unseen. Children ran beneath its shade, tossing a small ball between them, unaware of the weight of the murmurs, the tension in the adults' faces. The sun lowered slightly, casting long, thin shadows across the square. Amina noticed the play of light and dark, the way shadows seemed to crawl along the ground, stretching toward the walls and the stalls, as though the village itself sensed the brewing storm. Even the wind seemed different, soft at first, then whispering with a subtle edge, rustling leaves in a language only the elders understood. Nana Yas's eyes narrowed. "The day smiles, yet carries its own shadow," she muttered, almost to herself. "Watch, child, for joy and sorrow may dance together before the feast is done." Amina shivered, though she was unsure if it was from the wind, the words, or the stirring unease in her heart. She returned to the rice, stirring it gently, hoping that her care, her respect for the traditions, and her love for the village would shield the meal from harm. The whispers of the villagers grew louder, a ripple spreading through the square. "I saw him near the pots last night," someone said. "Do you think he would dare?" Another voice replied, "No one would harm the rice, would they?" Suspicion hung in the air, a heavy mist among the laughter and music. Amina's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the firewood beneath the steaming pots. The familiar smell of spices and cooking rice now carried an undercurrent of tension. Kofi lingered, watching the crowd's unease, feeding on it like a shadow feeding on the last light of day. Yet beneath his anger and envy, a flicker of uncertainty stirred. The baobab's leaves whispered, catching the sunlight in a way that made him glance up, unsettled. Nana Yas's gaze fell upon him, silent but penetrating, and a shiver ran down his spine. Somewhere deep in the village, the drums played steadily, their beat like a pulse of fate, reminding all that the community's heart continued to watch, to judge, to guide. As shadows lengthened across the courtyard, the first stirrings of evening approached. Children gathered their toys, villagers adjusted their decorations, and Amina stood, wiping her hands and surveying her work. Her eyes met Nana Yas, and in that look, she felt both warning and reassurance. The feast would come, the rice would be served, and the village would celebrate, but the day was no longer without tension. Something hovered in the air, a subtle unease mingled with joy, a reminder that in the village, happiness and challenge often walked side by side, and that the lessons of the ancestors were never far from those who listened. The stage was set. Beneath the ancient baobab, amid the laughter of children, the rhythmic beat of drums, and the fragrant steam of cooking rice, the story had begun. Joy and shadow, pride and envy, wisdom and warning, all were present in the village that morning, ready to unfold into the lessons and trials of the day to come. And somewhere, Kofi's gaze lingered, plotting in silence, while Amina stirred with care, unaware of how closely destiny watched, waiting for the unfolding of events that would shape the heart of the village for generations. Kofi lingered in the shadows of the marketplace, his eyes following Amina as she moved gracefully among the pots and baskets. The sun warmed the red-dusted streets, and the laughter of children rippled like wind through the clay-walled village, yet he felt none of the joy. Each glance at Amina sharpened the ache in his chest, a mixture of longing, pride, and bitter envy. He watched how the villagers approached her with respect, how mothers whispered her name when praising the aroma of the rice she stirred. "Why does it always have to be her?" Kofi muttered under his breath, the words carried off by the gentle morning breeze. His hands clenched into fists as the shadow of jealousy spread like a fire, slow but inevitable. He compared himself to her in every detail, the steady confidence in her hands, the gentle nods she gave to elders, the way she moved as if she belonged not just in the village but in the heart of every celebration. His mind churned with frustration. If he had recognition, influence, even a fraction of the admiration she commanded, he could finally feel seen. But now, all he had was the shadow of her light, and the envy began to twist into something darker, planting seeds that would soon grow into schemes and betrayals. That evening, under the veil of twilight, Kofi slipped quietly from the village and made his way toward the outskirts, where the dirt road met the forest. There, two figures waited, shrouded by the encroaching dusk. "You come seeking guidance?" one asked, a sly grin curling their lips. Kofi nodded, his heartbeat loud in his ears. "I want to be recognized. I want respect," he said carefully, as though the words themselves might betray him. The figures leaned closer, offering suggestions that danced between cunning and deceit, modern tricks wrapped in whispers of old, tempting him with ways to gain influence without honor. "You must act subtly," one said, pointing a finger toward the village lights in the distance. "Do not let your hand be seen, but let the outcome speak for itself. The people trust her, but trust is fragile, and envy can turn it to your favor if you act at the right moment." Kofi's eyes glimmered, a mixture of fear and anticipation. "But will the ancestors forgive this?" he asked, a flicker of doubt passing through him. The figures only laughed softly, their voices merging with the rustle of leaves, as if the wind itself were conspiratorial. "Forgiveness is for the weak. Power is for the patient," they whispered, vanishing into the shadows, leaving Kofi with a plan budding in his mind and a storm of anxiety coiling in his chest. Back in the village, Amina's family noticed the tension in the air. Her mother furrowed her brow as she watched Kofi move about, too quiet, too watchful. "He is different today," she whispered to Nana Ya, who had joined them near the hearth. "There is fire in his eyes, and I fear it may burn more than himself." Amina's father sighed, running his hands over his face. "How do we protect her, yet keep the family whole? We cannot shame him without causing strife." Conversations circled around the room like smoke, some voices urging caution, others warning of pride and duty. The family felt torn between protecting Amina's honor and preserving the fragile balance that kept their relationships intact. Nana Ya, seated with quiet dignity, raised a finger in thought and spoke with a voice both gentle and firm. "I have seen this before," she began, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames of the hearth. "Envy can be quiet, like the whisper of the wind, but it grows, and it can destroy more than the one it envies. There was a man in my youth who sought to undermine his sister's joy, thinking he would gain what was not his to take. The ancestors did not forgive easily, and he carried his shame to the grave. Remember, actions have echoes beyond the hand that makes them." Amina's heart tightened. She listened closely, each word heavy with warning, each pause filled with ancestral weight. "Grandmother, what should I do?" she asked softly, her hands clasped together. Nana Ya's eyes met hers, sharp and full of knowledge. "Guard your work, yes, but guard your spirit more. Trust the rice to honor you, but do not trust envy to remain hidden. Watch closely, listen carefully, and let your heart remain steadfast. The trial may come soon, and when it does, it will test not only your skill but the truth of your character." The room grew still, the crackling fire filling the silence between their words. Amina felt both fear and resolve. Outside, the wind shifted, stirring the baobab leaves as if carrying the grandmother's wisdom beyond the walls of the hut, into the village square. Shadows lengthened, the last golden rays of the sun slipping behind the rooftops. Kofi, unaware of the counsel being spoken within, plotted in the dimming light, his mind weaving the threads of his plan with both cunning and apprehension. The village continued its rhythm, the laughter of children playing tag near the central fountain, the market women calling out prices for their goods, the aroma of roasting maize drifting through the air. Yet beneath the familiar sounds and scents, a subtle unease lingered. Eyes that had once looked upon Amina with admiration now glanced suspiciously at one another, sensing a disturbance that had not yet taken form. The balance of joy and tension hung delicately, like the flickering flames of the hearth, waiting for the day's lessons to unfold. Nana Ya's voice broke the quiet once more, gentle but firm. "Remember this, child. What is sown in envy will never bloom with honor. Watch closely, trust wisely, and let your heart remain true. The ancestors are watching, and the rice will tell the story that words cannot." Amina nodded, feeling both the weight of her responsibility and the quiet strength that her grandmother's presence imparted. Outside, the shadows shifted, the wind whispered, and Kofi's silent fire of envy smoldered, setting the stage for the unfolding trials, the moral reckoning, and the dramatic lessons the village would soon witness. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the gaps between the clay huts, yet Amina felt no warmth in its glow. Her hands hovered over the polished bowls of rice, each grain gleaming like a tiny pearl, but they seemed heavier today, laden with the weight of expectation. The villagers moved around her, chatting, laughing, and decorating, but her focus was a tight knot of concentration and worry. Every eye, she imagined, would soon fall upon the rice she had prepared, and the thought made her heart hammer in her chest. "I must do right by them, by the ancestors," she whispered to herself, smoothing the rice with meticulous care. She measured each pinch with precision, feeling the weight of their trust pressing down upon her shoulders. The rice was more than food, it was honor, responsibility, and the reflection of her soul in the eyes of the village. A sudden shift in the air made her glance up. Dark clouds were rolling over the distant hills, heavy and low, blotting out the sun in swaths of gray. The wind stirred nervously, carrying with it the scent of rain and something less tangible, a warning that prickled along the back of her neck. The elders, seated beneath the baobab tree, murmured among themselves. "The ancestors speak through the skies," Nana Ya said quietly, her voice carrying like a soft drumbeat over the square. This storm comes not for rain alone but as a message. Watch for hearts that hide malice beneath smiles. Amina's fingers trembled as she returned to the rice, the rhythmic stirring now filled with anxiety. She could feel the tension in the air, mirrored in the rolling clouds and the distant rumble of thunder, a warning of challenges yet unseen. Even the animals seemed to sense the shift. Crows wheeled overhead in tight, unnerving circles, their black wings slicing the dimming light. Goats stamped their hooves, restless and uneasy, and the village dogs barked sharply at invisible disturbances, their cries echoing through the streets. The villagers noticed, murmuring and glancing at one another with worried eyes. "The omens are strong today," whispered one elder. "Nature herself stirs with the unease of men's hearts." The scent of wet earth and the distant crackle of lightning mingled with the aromas of cooking rice, creating a strange tension between festivity and foreboding. Even the children paused in their games, sensing a heaviness that they could not name. Amina shivered, a sudden premonition slipping into her mind like a cool hand on her shoulder. "The rice will reveal hearts," she whispered to no one, but her voice seemed carried by the wind, intertwining with the murmurs of the elders and the rustling of the baobab leaves. A chill ran through her, though the courtyard was warm with cooking fires and sunlight. She felt a sense of urgency, a warning that the rice would become more than a dish, it would become a mirror, exposing truth, loyalty, and betrayal alike. Her hands hovered over the bowls, unsure, and she felt the weight of destiny pressing on her shoulders as tangibly as the stones beneath her feet. Meanwhile, Kofi lingered near the edge of the courtyard, hidden by shadows and baskets. His plan, hatched in secrecy with whispers of cunning from outsiders, now showed the first tiny flaws. A misplaced spice here, a hesitation there, small mistakes that would ripple outward. He brushed off a misstep with a muttered curse, unaware that the villagers, in their idle glances and careful observations, began to notice inconsistencies. A pot stirred slightly differently than the rest, a bundle of herbs lay out of place. "Something is amiss," an older woman muttered to her neighbor, her eyes narrowing, scanning for the source. Kofi's brow furrowed in frustration, but the shadows offered no shelter from scrutiny. Amina felt the subtle shift in the courtyard's energy, though she could not yet pinpoint the source. The villagers' whispers, the restless animals, the distant thunder, they all spoke of imbalance and foreboding. She wiped her hands on her cloth and took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. Her unease blended with a sense of vigilance. She could feel the ancestors' eyes upon her through the ancient baobab, sensing the integrity in her actions and the deception hidden in the corners of the courtyard. She adjusted the firewood beneath the pots, measured another pinch of rice, and whispered a silent prayer, hoping that care and respect could shield her work from harm. Kofi shifted in the shadows, cursing softly. His impatience, his envy, and his fear of failure gnawed at him. "It must work, it must," he whispered, a bead of sweat running down his temple. Yet even as he schemed, the omens, the crows, the restless goats, the dogs barking into the wind, made him uneasy. The air itself seemed to carry warning. A faltering step here, a glance toward the elders there, hinted that his plan, born of jealousy and modern cunning, might not unfold as he intended. The subtle cracks in his scheme foreshadowed consequences he had not anticipated. The day stretched on, shadows lengthening as the storm edged closer. Amina's anxiety intertwined with determination, Kofi's envy mingled with doubt. The village moved in rhythm around them, caught between the anticipation of the feast and the tension that whispered through every corner. The air was thick with expectation, moral weight, and unspoken threats. Each stirring of the rice, each glance, each whisper of the wind carried meaning. The seeds of conflict, the signs of moral reckoning, and the watchful eyes of the ancestors were all present, setting the stage for a day where the hearts of men and women would be revealed, and where honor, envy, and justice would converge beneath the watchful gaze of the baobab. Even as the first drops of rain began to splatter against the clay rooftops, Amina stirred the rice with renewed focus, grounding herself in the knowledge that her actions, her care, and her integrity would guide the outcome. Kofi retreated slightly, frustration and unease coiling together. Somewhere, deep within the village, Nana Ya observed, nodding imperceptibly, her eyes reflecting both worry and hope. The storm, the animals, the whispered premonitions, and the subtle cracks in Kofi's plan all wove together, a tapestry of suspense, drama, and impending moral reckoning. The day had shifted. What had begun as celebration now carried the weight of destiny, and the rice, humble and fragrant, awaited the moment it would reveal truth. The night settled over the village like a heavy cloth, thick and quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Shadows stretched across the clay walls, stretching the world into shapes that seemed both familiar and strange. Kofi moved through these shadows, silent as a creeping snake, his heart pounding with a mix of fear, excitement, and envy. The moon cast silver light over the square, illuminating the rice pots stacked carefully for the morning feast. Each step he took was measured, deliberate, and yet filled with the dark weight of his intent. The shadows themselves seemed to mirror the moral darkness inside him, wrapping him in their cool embrace. "Tonight they will see," he whispered to himself, eyes flicking toward the baobab that stood sentinel over the village. Its branches seemed to stretch toward the stars, like fingers pointing toward truth, and for a brief instant he felt the gaze of ancestors upon him. He shook it off, forcing his focus back on the rice. A misplaced pinch of spice, a subtle shift of a bundle of herbs, small, almost invisible acts that would unravel the harmony Amina had so carefully woven. Every move carried silent malice, yet beneath it all, a twinge of fear that the ancestors might notice, that the moral scales of the village would tip against him. Meanwhile, inside her hut, Amina had risen before dawn, preparing the rice with meticulous care. She hummed softly, but her heart was uneasy. Something in the air did not feel right. She paused, glancing toward the courtyard where the rice had been left for the night. A slight disturbance caught her eye, a scattering of herbs, a pot slightly askew. Her brow furrowed. "What?" she murmured, stepping closer. The rice was perfect, yet the signs of tampering were subtle but unmistakable. A pulse of dread rose in her chest, not fear for herself, but for the trust placed in her by the village and the ancestors. Her intuition stirred, a warning whispering along her spine. By dawn, the village was alive once more, bustling with activity, laughter, and the aroma of cooking fires. Children darted between stalls, carrying colorful fabrics and offerings. Market women shouted prices for vegetables and spices, their voices rising above the rhythmic beat of drums that echoed across the clay rooftops. Yet beneath the cheerful chaos, an invisible tension lingered, like the calm before a storm. Amina moved among the preparations, her hands steady but her heart tight. Every glance at the rice reminded her of the weight of expectation, and the subtle unease from the night before seemed to whisper, reminding her that something was amiss. Kofi retreated into the shadows, watching from a distance, his plan seemingly unnoticed. Yet even as he felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, small mistakes, an overturned leaf, a misplaced bundle, caught the eye of some villagers passing nearby. "Did you see that?" an elder whispered, squinting into the sunlight. "Something is not right with the rice preparations." The words drifted through the crowd, unnoticed by most but enough to seed doubt and curiosity, the subtle cracks of a plan beginning to show. The feast began as the sun climbed high. Villagers gathered, wearing their finest fabrics, children hanging colorful decorations from the baobab, and the drums announcing the moment of celebration. Amina's rice was brought forth, its aroma rich and fragrant, drawing murmurs of admiration. Yet as the first ladle of rice was served, small disturbances became noticeable. One villager paused mid-bite, frowning, a faint cough escaping him. Another wrinkled his nose, sensing a slightly off flavor in the communal dish. Murmurs spread through the crowd, whispers carrying across the square. Amina felt a chill, the familiar premonition returning with sudden force. She looked toward Kofi, whose eyes darted nervously from face to face, a shadow of unease crossing his features. The rice, once a symbol of unity and prosperity, now carried the weight of hidden intentions and revealed hearts. The village paused, sensing that the harmony they had relied upon might be fractured. Yet within the subtle mishaps, there was clarity. Truth was making itself known, quietly, insistently, in the taste and aroma of the rice. The moral scales, guided by ancestral watchfulness, were already beginning to tilt. Nana Ya stood under the baobab, her eyes calm yet piercing, observing the unfolding events. She whispered to those near her, her voice carrying both warning and reassurance, "The rice speaks. It tells of hearts, of deeds done in shadows. Watch closely, for justice will rise where deception falls." Amina's hands trembled slightly, but her resolve hardened. She understood now that her responsibility was greater than mere preparation. The rice was not only nourishment, it was revelation. The villagers looked among themselves, curiosity and unease mixing with festivity. Some glanced toward Kofi, suspicion dawning in their eyes. The young man shifted, uncomfortable, aware that the subtle signs of failure in his plan were no longer invisible. The drums continued their rhythm, almost mocking in their persistence, as if calling for truth to step forward amid the revelry. Children paused in their games, sensing the tension in the air, while elders nodded knowingly, recognizing the balance between joy and moral reckoning. Amina stepped forward, taking a deep breath, her voice calm but filled with authority. "Let this rice remind us," she said, "that the heart guides the hand, and the actions of one can affect the many. Let honesty and care lead us, as the ancestors watch over all." Her words rippled through the crowd, carrying both wisdom and warning. Kofi, caught between pride and fear, lowered his eyes, feeling the weight of moral truth settle upon him like the heavy shadows of night. The feast continued, yet the atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as celebration now carried the layered tension of revelation. The rice, humble and fragrant, had done more than feed. They had reflected the intentions, envy, and integrity of those who touched it. And under the baobab tree, the eyes of the ancestors seemed to glimmer in the fading sunlight, witnessing the first unfolding of justice and setting the stage for reconciliation, redemption, and the moral lessons that would echo through the village for generations to come. The villagers' whispers swelled into a wave of murmurs that seemed to ripple across the square. Kofi, standing at the edge of the gathering, felt the shift in the air before the words reached his ears. Eyes that had once avoided him now focused with suspicion, curiosity, and dawning recognition. "It is he," an elder muttered, pointing a finger that shook slightly with anger. Children, sensing the tension, froze mid-laugh, their small faces wide with apprehension. The drums, once lively and cheerful, fell into a slow, uneasy rhythm, as if the heartbeat of the village had synchronized with the unfolding moral reckoning. Kofi's shoulders stiffened, and his jaw tightened. I do not understand," he stammered, his voice barely carrying over the murmurs. The crowd did not move. Eyes narrowed, voices quieted, and every soul seemed to lean forward, waiting for the truth to reveal itself fully. Nana Ya emerged from the shadows, her staff tapping lightly against the earth. "The rice speaks, Kofi," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years, of ancestors, and of village law. "The hearts of men are never hidden from those who watch and remember. Your envy has touched all, and all shall know its path." Gasps rippled through the villagers. A few murmured in sympathy for Amina, some shook their heads in disappointment at Kofi. His face paled as he realized that the subtle mistakes he had dismissed as trivial had been observed, noted, and understood. The rice had revealed more than flavor, it had reflected intention. Whispers of betrayal, woven into the aroma and appearance of the dish, had been noticed, and the veil of secrecy lifted. Kofi's shoulders slumped, shame anchoring him to the ground, and his eyes flicked toward Amina, seeking her reaction. Amina's heart pounded. The choice before her was immense. Every eye in the village seemed to rest upon her, expecting her to respond, to judge, to decide the fate of Kofi and, in some ways, the moral lesson of the day. Her hands clenched lightly, yet she drew in a steadying breath. "Shall I repay hatred with hatred?" she murmured to herself, glancing toward the baobab whose vast branches towered above. The tree seemed to watch, ancient and patient, a silent counsel reminding her of virtue, wisdom, and balance. "Or shall I guide with compassion, teaching what anger cannot?" She stepped forward, her voice calm yet filled with strength. "Kofi," she said, looking directly into his eyes, "your envy has harmed more than yourself. But the path to honor is still open, if your heart chooses rightly. Let this rice be our teacher. It reflects truth, and truth calls for reflection, not destruction." The villagers listened, holding their collective breath, sensing the weight of her words. Some nodded subtly, others murmured agreement, recognizing the courage it took to wield mercy as a tool of instruction. A sudden gust of wind stirred the square, rustling the baobab's massive leaves with a sound like whispered applause. Shadows lengthened and danced across the ground, the goats and dogs shifted uneasily, and the crows took flight with sharp cries into the dimming sky. Even the air seemed alive with the presence of ancestors, validating Amina's decision and marking the moment as sacred. The baobab, silent yet commanding, bore witness to both guilt and grace, a guardian over the village's moral equilibrium. Kofi's eyes filled with shame and fear. His head bowed, the weight of his actions pressing down, as the villagers' murmurs softened into a reflective silence. "I have done wrong," he admitted, voice trembling. "I sought pride where there should have been respect. I have betrayed not only Amina but the trust of all who dwell here." His confession, simple yet profound, marked the first step toward redemption, as each villager considered the balance of justice and compassion. Amina extended her hand, not in accusation but in guidance. "The ancestors watch, Kofi. Let this shame guide you to humility and better deeds. Let the village's trust be restored through actions, not words alone." Kofi's fingers hesitated over hers, then grasped lightly, a silent promise to change. Around them, the villagers exhaled collectively, tension easing as the moral scales began to balance. The children resumed their play, the drums lifted into a gentle rhythm once more, and the aroma of the Christmas rice, though tinged by the night's mischief, remained a symbol of communal unity. The village square, once thick with anticipation and uncertainty, now shimmered with the soft glow of reconciliation. Eyes met with understanding, nods acknowledged lessons learned, and whispers of the day's events began weaving themselves into stories to be told around future fires. Kofi, humbled and attentive, worked quietly beside Amina to repair what he had nearly destroyed, while the elders, including Nana Ya, observed with approval, the shadows of the baobab stretching over all as a symbol of watchful justice. And beneath it all, the ancestral presence lingered, quiet yet palpable, a reminder that envy and deceit may stir storms, but integrity, wisdom, and courage guide the way back to harmony. The village had witnessed the consequences of a hidden heart and the triumph of moral courage. Through the rice, the shadows, and the vigilant eyes of the community, the story of justice, forgiveness, and redemption was etched into the memory of all, destined to ripple through generations as a cautionary tale, and a celebration of the enduring power of virtue. The village square was quiet now, though not empty. The laughter of children had returned, slower and more careful, as if learning to measure joy against the lessons of the day. The smell of the Christmas rice still lingered in the air, a gentle reminder of both harmony and disturbance. Villagers moved among one another, exchanging soft words, nodding to reaffirm trust, yet pausing occasionally to glance toward the baobab. Its wide branches spread like protective arms over the square, its roots gripping the earth as though anchoring the moral compass of the community. Some women whispered to one another, voices threaded with relief. "The rice has taught us well," one said. "It is more than a meal, it is a mirror of our hearts." Men nodded in agreement, acknowledging that the events had been a test not of strength or courage alone, but of honesty, patience, and communal care. The symbolic weight of the rice, once a simple dish for celebration, had become the village's teacher, reminding all that unity required vigilance, respect, and love. Kofi lingered at the edge of the gathering, shoulders heavy, eyes fixed on the ground. He had seen the disappointment in his family's gaze, the quiet judgment in the elders' eyes, and the subtle sorrow in the villagers' faces. For the first time, he understood that envy was not harmless. It poisoned not only relationships but one's own spirit. "I sought pride," he whispered to himself, "and found only shame. I have harmed more than Amina. I have harmed my own heart." The words were bitter, yet they carried clarity, and clarity was the first step toward redemption. With hesitant, careful steps, Kofi approached Amina. Every villager turned their eyes toward the pair, the silence thick with expectation. "Amina," he said, voice low but trembling, "I have wronged you and the village. My envy blinded me, and my actions have caused harm where there should have been honor. I ask your forgiveness, not because I deserve it, but because I seek to learn, to change, and to restore what I have broken." His hands shook slightly, the weight of his guilt pressing against his chest. Amina regarded him, her gaze steady, neither cold nor dismissive. She remembered the eyes of the ancestors in the rustling leaves of the baobab, their silent counsel echoing through her mind. The village had watched, the rice had revealed truth, and now the moment demanded a response that reflected wisdom and virtue. She inhaled deeply, letting the rhythm of the drums, faintly resuming in the distance, settle her heart. "Kofi," she said, her voice calm yet commanding, "acknowledgement of wrongdoing is the first step. The next is action guided by honesty, humility, and respect. I forgive you, not for weakness, but so that the lessons of today may guide both our hearts and the hearts of this village." A murmur of relief rippled through the villagers. Mothers straightened their children, men exhaled quietly, and the elders exchanged nods of approval. The baobab's branches seemed to shift in the wind, leaves rustling as though applauding the reconciliation below. Even the animals, The goats, the crows, the dogs, paused for a moment, their restless energy giving way to stillness, as if acknowledging the restoration of moral balance. Kofi's eyes lifted, glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered, voice catching. "I will honor your forgiveness, Amina, and strive to live rightly under the watch of the ancestors and this village." Amina placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, a gesture of guidance and strength, not of dominance. "Then walk with integrity, Kofi," she said softly. "Let this day, this rice, and these eyes of our people guide you always." The villagers returned to the feast slowly, their steps lighter than before, sharing small smiles and quiet laughter. The rice, though touched by the night's mischief, remained a symbol of resilience, unity, and moral reflection. It was served and eaten with gratitude, and each bite carried the lesson that honesty, care, and communal trust were far more valuable than fleeting envy or ambition. Children ran under the shade of the baobab, mimicking the elders' lessons in small, playful ways. Grandmother Nana Ya watched, her eyes gleaming with pride and quiet satisfaction. "The heart of the village is strong," she murmured, "because it is guided by truth, tempered by forgiveness, and guarded by wisdom." Her words, spoken softly, traveled unseen through the branches, to the very edges of the square, settling gently into the hearts of all present. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the square, a gentle calm enveloped the village. Kofi, now humbled and contemplative, moved to help with the final preparations, working beside Amina, learning the rhythm of generosity and care. The elders smiled knowingly, the villagers reflected on their own choices, and the baobab tree, ancient and unwavering, stood sentinel, its presence a reminder that the lessons of today, born of rice, envy, forgiveness, and wisdom, would echo through generations. And thus, the Christmas rice became more than a meal. It became a story, a caution, and a celebration of moral courage. The village remembered that the heart of a community is shaped not only by tradition but by the choices of each soul, guided by ancestors, by virtue, and by the enduring power of compassion over vengeance. The drums resumed their steady rhythm as the villagers gathered once more around the long wooden tables, their faces bright with cautious relief. The Christmas rice, though slightly altered from its original perfection, steamed gently in the center of the spread, its aroma mingling with the scents of roasted meats, spicy vegetables, and sweet honey cakes. Each villager took a portion, bowing their heads in gratitude, recognizing that this meal was more than sustenance. It was a symbol of survival, trust, and restored unity. Laughter returned, soft at first, then growing as the children chased one another through the alleys, their squeals echoing off the clay huts. The village, once shadowed by doubt and envy, now thrummed with the warmth of togetherness. Elders leaned on their carved walking sticks, speaking quietly to one another, recounting lessons learned in lives long lived. "Even the smallest grain, when handled with care, reflects the heart of its maker," one said, nodding toward Amina. Another added, "Dishonesty may visit, but it is truth and courage that guide us through the storm." Villagers murmured assent, reflecting on the missteps of Kofi and the steadfast patience of Amina. Children listened, eyes wide, learning that morality and honor were not abstract tales, but living principles, experienced and observed in real time. Families huddled together, whispering stories of their own struggles, drawing strength from the shared understanding that honesty, loyalty, and respect were the pillars of their community. Above them, the baobab tree spread its mighty branches, leaves rustling in a gentle wind that seemed to echo the ancestors' presence. Crows perched high on the limbs, and even the goats, now calm, grazed quietly at the edges of the square. It was as though nature itself had paused to witness the village's redemption. Villagers understood this as the blessing of justice served, not with cruelty, but with clarity and balance. Kofi stood beside Amina, head bowed, humility written across his face. His hands, once restless with envy, now rested calmly at his sides. "I see the harm I have done," he whispered, "and I am grateful for the chance to make amends, to walk rightly among you all and honor our traditions." Amina placed her hand lightly on his shoulder, a gesture of forgiveness and guidance. The feast continued, but the air had changed. Conversations now carried wisdom and reflection, tales of the past merging with lessons freshly learned. Elders recounted stories of ancestors who had faced similar trials, cautioning that envy always leaves scars if left unchecked. Mothers reminded children that unity was stronger than any desire for personal glory. Fathers spoke quietly of the responsibilities each person carried toward the village and toward one another. The lesson was clear: integrity, patience, and communal care were more powerful than individual ambition, and the rice had revealed these truths in ways that no words alone could convey. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the clay huts in gold and amber, Amina and Kofi walked together beneath the baobab tree. Children ran around them, laughter mixing with a steady hum of celebration. The village looked on, hearts full of renewed trust and hope. The story of the Christmas rice, the envy, the sabotage, the moral reckoning, and the ultimate forgiveness, would be told again and again, passed from parent to child, from elder to youth, ensuring that future generations understood the weight of their actions and the strength of virtue. And in that moment, the village recognized something greater than the feast itself. They saw that even in the presence of human frailty, guided by the watchful eyes of ancestors and the principles of truth and compassion, unity could be restored. Forgiveness had triumphed over vengeance. Honesty had outweighed deceit. The heart of the village, once tested, had grown stronger. And the Christmas rice, humble yet enduring, would forever be remembered as a teacher, a witness, and a symbol of moral resilience. The shadows lengthened, the drum's rhythm softened, and the village settled into a quiet contentment. Mothers hummed lullabies to their children, elders whispered blessings, and the wind carried the faint, approving rustle of the baobab's leaves. The balance between human effort and ancestral guidance had been reaffirmed. The feast was not merely a meal, it was a covenant between generations, a celebration of unity restored, a promise that integrity, forgiveness, and the strength of community would endure. And so, as night fell gently over the clay rooftops, the story of the Christmas rice, its trials, its lessons, and its triumphs, took its place among the legends of the village. Children would awaken tomorrow remembering the day the rice revealed hearts, elders would tell it again at the fireside, and Amina, Kofi, and all who had witnessed the events would carry forward the wisdom that true celebration lies not in abundance alone, but in the courage, honesty, and compassion of those who share it.